In the fight for gun ownership and gun rights across the country, the focus has mainly been on the federal level. With the election of the Liberal Party at the federal level, well, you're not going to get a whole lot of sympathy for law-abiding gun owners across the country. So what can be done? Well, Todd Brown has started a new group, and they are focusing on the provincial end. Todd joins me now from Edmonton, Alberta. Todd, you have been involved with concerned gun owners of Alberta in the past. You've been involved with various national groups. Tell me about your new organization, and then we'll get into what you've done on the provincial level that could have an impact come next election.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Brian. It's a new organization. We call it the Firearms Institute for Rational Education. We're focusing on a bit of a different line from the other groups. We want to be able to educate and train people on the reality of our current laws and guiding the way to influence people into the political system to change them. We want to help create policy for gun-friendly laws and educate in the realities of firearm legislation, ownership, and the handling of firearms as well. We were incorporated August 13th, so we've been around for just a couple of months, just getting everything organized and set up, and we've had some success here provincially, but we're working federally as well.
All right. Well, you know, it's good that you're saying you want to educate people on what the laws are. I was speaking with someone today, very much a conservative bent to this fellow on the fiscal side of things, but we started talking about handguns because in Ottawa we've had an uptick in shootings. Well, it's all gangs. It's all gang related, but this person started saying, well, we need to get rid of handguns. No one should be allowed to own a handgun, and this will solve the gang problem. And I said, I don't think you really understand what the laws are right now. The people doing these shootings are already breaking a whole pile of laws, and if they're caught, they would face serious jail time. Why take away a gun from a law-abiding citizen that's followed the rules? And I don't think they knew the rules, and I don't think many Canadians do.
Yeah, that's correct. You know, our current firearm laws would be comparable to driving down the freeway and having the cops giving everybody but the speeders speeding tickets.
Yeah, well, sometimes I feel like the police guns and gangs units in various cities across the country spend more time looking for ways to harass law-abiding gun owners than they do criminals because, well, they know where the law-abiding gun owners are. It's easier to deal with, but oftentimes that is driven either by an agenda or ignorance by people. They don't know about the law-abiding gun ownership community. You've been able to convince the Wildrose Party to adopt a policy, and I want to read off what they've adopted. Am I correct? They have adopted this, or they will be adopting?
No, it was voted on and adopted at the AGM in Calgary this previous weekend.
Okay, so I'm going to read off what the policy is, and then we'll chat about why this is important, because this takes the fight from the federal to the provincial level. And their new policy says that if they form government, the government of Alberta should take control of the administration, application, and interpretation of the Firearms Act with the goal of reducing paperwork and legal hurdles for gun owners in Alberta. The government should also appoint our own chief firearms officer and limit what the CFO can do on an arbitrary basis. Why is that important?
Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of history here. When the Firearms Act was brought into being, Alberta opted out. It was then Ralph Klein. He didn't want anything to do with it. So the federal government appointed a CFO that is under federal jurisdiction to administer the act provincially. Mm-hmm. That means that the provincial government has no say or influence into what policies come out of the CFO's office. Now, if we were to administer this regulation provincially, we will have some say or influence in what policies are coming out of the CFO's office.
The current legislation, and unfortunately it wasn't changed before the election, the current legislation gives an awful lot of leeway to chief firearms officers. Ontario's chief firearms officer, Chris Brown, or I believe he's still there, he may have retired, it's around that time period. When the gun registry was taken away, he led the charge to have CFOs bring in a backdoor gun registry. And he was writing to his counterparts in other provinces saying, hey, let's force all the gun shops to keep paper records, and we'll give them the books and they can keep everything except the registration number. It was a registry by any other name. That's the sort of power and leeway they have. They have the ability to, in my view, invent rules that aren't supported by legislation.
Yeah, that's correct. Actually, it's from Section 58 of the Firearms Act that allows them to do that. They can create policy, and it's backed by the law of Section 58. And policies come from opinions. So if you have somebody with an anti-gun opinion, not saying that they do or not, but the bent seems to be there, that could become a policy, and then it's backed by law. A really good example of that is forcing people to acquire a range membership to possess a restricted firearm. That's not law from the Firearms Act, but rather a policy from the CFO that's backed up by Section 58.
Yeah, and the that was a fight that I know took place in Ontario. It may still be working its way through the courts. It is unfortunate that that part of the law wasn't changed, but you feel that having a provincial government that is not adverse to civilian gun ownership, it might lessen some of this.
Yeah, it's basically paperwork. Like, we can't deal with some of the big issues concerning the Firearms Act, but there are provincial policies that can be changed or revamped to fit our Western lifestyle. There was another one. There was an instructor contract that came out some time ago, and number 18 on that contract states, "You agree to any further conditions as required by the CFO."
Oh, this is the one that ended up seeing you leave as a firearms instructor, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. Actually, I did a search on this, and we lost almost 50% of our instructor base due to this contract.
Wow.
And this came from the CFO. This was an Alberta thing.
So, if other groups across the country start targeting provincial parties, provincial governments, try and bring about this sort of policy, that could help. You mentioned the Western lifestyle, and I'm sitting here in Ottawa, steps from the Ottawa River that divides Ottawa from Quebec, from Gatineau. And I know a lot of people think that Quebec is very much a pro-gun registry, pro-gun control province. That's Montreal. You get outside of Montreal, and it is one of the biggest markets for hunting and fishing in the country. You know, if those guys flex their muscle, if the guys in Ontario flex their muscle and convince provincial parties to adopt this, it could bring about a sea change, I think.
Yeah, it's an interesting way to go about it, but it's not something that comes easy or comes quickly. You have to get involved with your local constituency associations. You have to find a party that is more pro-gun, of course. All I did with this policy was get it put on the floor of the Wildrose. It was actually the Wildrose membership that passed it. I just got it there.
Well,
okay, so I have to give.
You have to be able to sell the policy. You have to be able to convince them, and obviously, they saw the wisdom in this.
Evidently, yes, they did, and it really warmed my heart to see all the people voting for this policy.
All right, Todd Brown joining us from Edmonton, Alberta. He's with the Firearms Institute for Rational Education. FIRE. I can remember FIRE. I have trouble with the full name, Todd, but thanks for joining us.
Not a problem, Brian. Thank you for having me.